thanks to all of you for coming and for joining us for this book launch. I don't know if how many of you have already bought it. I'll be advertising it a few times throughout the evening. I'm particularly pleased with this book and really Franca and Alan's conversation that they captured so well. One that they had over a period of, well, he said the age of your daughter. He said it started when your daughter was inside of you, and she is about just around 7 or so, huh? Yeah, a vibrant young woman. And so it's a lovely book that gives us tremendous wisdom for this difficult job of running a not-for-profit, which has changed so much in the years that I've been in that role. And I so identified with the book as a guide for grappling with some of the difficult questions that come with leadership, and particularly how does one make a difference while keeping the whole thing running. But there's also practical elements to this book that I think you'll find extremely interesting, such as, what do you do when you start? What do you do before? How do you leave well? And so some really wonderful topics that go with that. So what we want to do is we don't want to keep you too long today. We know that you have other lives, but we wanted to introduce you to the book and give you a sense also of the authors. And we're so pleased to have Franca Guicciardi.
Perfect.
Is that really?
Yeah.
Guicciardi. I love that. It's Italian, huh? Beautiful.
You think?
But from now on, I'll just say Franca, because I screw up names pretty quickly. And Alan Broadbent are here as the authors, and it's an honor to have them coming in from Toronto. And we're going to interview them, ask them some questions. And then we have, later on in the program, we have Sandra and Katie here, two CEOs from different stages in their careers. And they as well are going to be asking some questions. And by that time, you should be warmed up. And then we'll open it up to you to ask a few questions yourself. And again, we'll wrap up with refreshments and book signing, and that'll be the evening. So, Alan, Franca, why don't you come on up and join me here for some opening comments. Welcome. I don't know whether, you tell us whether we need this. I don't think, with my voice you will, but I don't know. We'll see how you guys do.
I was raised by an Italian mama. I'm loud enough.
You're good. So, I'm always curious around the moment that you felt a book was needed. Like what was it that, it's such a effort to write a book. So, the moment you feel it's needed, I always feel it's a strong moment. It's a moment where you say, this is important. It has to be captured. Franca, why don't we start with you?
Okay. And I guess in some ways I was the one who sort of started that conversation. So Alan and I had been having these conversations for years. I had started at Loran now about 13 years ago almost. And it was an organization in a difficult moment when I took it over, and it was the first time I was CEO, and we were sort of having this little chat beforehand. But in those moments, lots of people are really happy to give you advice on what you should do. Just like what you need to do, and what you need to do. The conversation always began that way, except for Alan. So Alan, I'd go to him. I would sort of give him a sense of what some of the things that I was thinking about in that moment and then he would just ask me questions and just really allow me to kind of have the space to figure stuff out for myself. And so after years of doing this, I kind of realized how, it would be nice if these conversations were accessible to everybody, because I realized how essential they had been to my own learning and to the journey of my work at Loran. And so that's sort of really where it began. It was sort of very clear to me because I didn't know anything out there that was really meant for that.
Nice, nice. So, Franca, that was Lorraine Scholars Foundation.
Correct.
I have. You said that was your first gig.
My first
Your
gig
first
as a CEO.
And tell us a little bit about the kind of management situation that you found yourself in. How many staff were there, or what was the nature of the foundation? What was going on?
So it was an organization that had, let me actually first sort of say that it was an organization whose idea, right from the beginning, was brilliant and continued to be brilliant. It still had relevance. It was important. The work was still really important and really clear. It had gone from the hands of a founder who loved it from day one and brought it to life.
Lauren?
Laurent, you know, that's not his name. Bob Fluid is his name.
Oh,
Good old Bob Fluid, yes. And you know, he never even drew a salary from it, right? So sort of the traditional kind of founder. And then it went from him to someone else, and then to me. And you know, you hear about it all the time, right? Sometimes the transitions are pretty difficult. They can be pretty difficult. They don't have to be, but they often are. And so there was a bit of a vacuum, and things had been sort of allowed to kind of decay a bit, you know, in the sense of the organizational work, not on the idea. So you know, the staff were, how do I say it? I say this. They needed to do other things. You know, they're just being held back from realizing their full potential somewhere else. And
now that chapter on letting people go. Okay.
You know, and there were different reasons for that, right? But it was in that moment, right? I mean, I'll give you my first day on the job to kind of give you a sense of it. I showed up, I was the first one there, and my first staff member arrived at 10, then at 10:30, then at 11, a couple didn't show up at all. So just to kind of give me a sense.
Great way to greet your boss.
Yeah. I also sat in a chair and it broke, and I was like, oh. It's going to be fun. So that just to kind of give you a sense of, and you know, where it was. And it was a symptom of really of the culture that had been built. It wasn't even these individual people, honestly. It was sort of, just sort of how, you know, how things kind of happen that way. So, and I was basically kind of given a mandate that if we don't turn it around in 6 months, you know, the big funder, who at the time was 85% of the shop, was going to walk away. So, you know, sort of get going. And so there wasn't much time to also think through, and, you know, you had to move, and you had to move fast, and you had to make some decisions quickly.
Nice.
So, can I add a little bit?
In a moment.
Yeah, no.
I have a specific question for you, actually. But this was always my opportunity to get Franca to speak and then to introduce her. That's what I want to do, and just give a sense of her background. As she already said, that was her first CEO role with the Lawrence Scholars Foundation. She's currently with the McCall McGee.
I'm currently still with Lorraine until July 20th.
And you're moving over.
I am moving
to
over.
the
McBain
Foundation. She designed and implemented Canada's Millennium Excellence Award program. She is a fellow of the International Women's Forum, a recipient of the Gil Bennett Gold Standard Governance Award, and a recipient of the Sarah Kirk Award for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. So thanks for being with us.
And a Waterloo alum.
And a Waterloo alum. So Alan, you can speak, and I kind of anticipated what you were going to say. So we were both on the same page, I think, here. So
We'll see.
Alan, of course, is chairman and co-founder of the Tamarack Institute, and has been a mentor for me as well. So we've had many of these conversations. I always joke that Alan has this desk that's called an accountant's desk, and it's really two desks in one. And I always thought this was so profound because it's, you know, like you both sit as equals on either side. And I'm sure at some point he thought, well, this would be a good thing, but I heard at the end that he actually bought it because it was on sale. Price. But it had this wonderful symbolic meaning, and it was very meaningful for me through that. Alan's a philanthropist and a marvelous human being. Also, Alan, so here's Franca. we just knew her. Talk a little bit about that situation. Now you can say what you wanted to say, but also talk a little bit about you know, the time you met her and kind of, I mean, you've been described as a mentor in this context, and one that listens and provides good feedback. But just about the kind of how that led then to the advice that is in the book itself.
Yeah, well, I met Franca when she was a student, one of the scholars, the Lorraine Scholars, as we used to call it in those days, the Canadian Merit Scholarship Foundation.
Right.
I had been involved with the foundation pretty much from the outset, and had been on the board and been chair of the board for a period of time. And Frank and I think pretty much from the start when we met each other, we got along well, would have conversations, and then when she was formally engaged back at Lorraine, we began to have a more structured set of conversations about it. And while it was at a point of dislocation, particularly around leadership at the time, as Franca said, the basic assets were fairly strong. It's a really good idea. Grant Braber, one of our a former board member and a former university president and chairman of a bank, one of our leading people, who's been around universities for a long time, said at one point it was the best idea to come out of the Canadian university system in the last decade. And essentially it's modeled somewhat on the Rhodes Scholarship, but it's for graduating high school students. And it looks at their character, leadership, and community service as the criteria for selection. And it has a selection process that is very heavily oriented towards face-to-face interviews with Canadians, not just with academics, but with a broad range of Canadians. And so the basic idea was very strong and the basic assets were very strong, but the transition had been weak and the leadership was had not been sufficient to what was needed. And so I knew Franca's work at the Millennium Scholarship Fund. I know it secondhand, but I knew she had what it took to do it. So she always very kindly says, I never gave her any direction. I could never think of anything to tell her, but I had a great deal of trust that she could think of it, and she would come up with the answers that she needed to come up with. And so we really just talked through, I think, a lot of the situation and talked about what parts of the Lorraine organization were strong. Was the selection system strong? Where were the weaknesses? Was the fundraising system strong? If not, where were the weaknesses? And is the kind of, there's a proper word for it. I always call it the care and feeding of the students. You call it pastoral care. Strong, or were the gaps and weaknesses, and so how do you remediate those weaknesses? And so it was, I wouldn't say obvious the work to be done, but it's something you could talk through. And I always have a view that there's lots of answers to things. There's very seldom a perfect answer. And so talking yourself towards better answers is a good way to get to something that can be effective and work. And I think that's really what we did. I think there was, and the fact we got along well, we liked each other, really helped.
Nice. So I'm going to bring up Sandra Hanmer and Katie Gingerich. Sandra is with Capacity Waterloo and one of the sponsors today, and Katie is one of the early members here. Paul Heinrich's leading the Kindred Credit Union Center for Peace Advancement and has developed this wonderful project. She's a social entrepreneur in the early days. And of course, Sandra has been a CEO almost as long as I have. And so we thought we would bring them together and get to the meat of the book. Both of them had got a pre-review copy of the book, and maybe we could open it to you to kind of help us to understand the questions of it. What questions do you have to these two wise leaders?
I guess maybe I'll start with a question to Alan. When I was reading through the book, there's lots of good wisdom that between your conversation that's come through. If you paused and reflected right now, as Alan, as seasoned as you are, what two pieces of advice would you give young Alan starting a career today?
Well, I guess the first one, not necessarily in importance, but it is that virtually everything you need to do to succeed, you can learn. You don't have to be born into it. You know, we talk about born leadership. I think you can learn virtually everything you need, and recognizing that is empowering, because then it just becomes a question of whether you're going to work hard enough to learn, and that you can control. You can control how hard you're working, and so that would be one piece of advice. Work hard to learn the stuff you need to know, because you can learn it, you will learn it, and that will help a lot. The second thing I would talk about, or think, advise myself, Frank and I have talked about this before, but it's about what I call bravery. You know, having a sense of courage about your work and about your willingness to defend, support things you believe in that you think are important, not just for yourself, but things for the work and for the people you're trying to serve through your organization. It means being prepared to differ with other people. It means being prepared to run against the grain, sometimes if you're convinced that the grain is running the wrong way. And it does require bravery, and sometimes it's bravery just to plod, you know, and
Stick to it.
Stick to it and not accept kind of the siren call of a glorious moment, but just to that kind of personal sense of standing up, being brave, and not just believing in something, but being prepared to defend it.
Defend it through the course.
Yeah.
Katie, for you, you're a new CEO of this marvelous organization, the Ripple Effect. What could you learn from these two?
Yeah, my question as a social innovator, working on a very new startup project, how does traditional NGO leadership relate or translate to new budding startup social enterprises?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think when you're running an organization, you're running an organization. Doesn't really matter where, even at the stages it's at. At the end of the day, there's some basic things you got to put together to sort of run the organization, right? So whether it's selecting the team, so the book kind of takes you through it, right? Select the team, both the team that you're working with every day and the team that directs your work as a board, right? So you sort of have to learn how to work with the two, right? Because you're the person smack in the middle. So I mean, sort of, and then just the basics of some of the book sort of outlines. I think I'll sort of take it like as to what we hope the book will actually do overall, which is why it's called You're It, which is that if for a first-time CEO taking on the role, the most difficult thing to fully understand is that you are it, and there's no one to blame for anything. You know, there isn't. You know, if you've always had a boss, at the end of the day, that person is always the person accountable. So no matter how much you take accountability for your own work, there's always someone. And sometimes you can translate and sort of those feelings and put them onto your board, you know, saying that now they're the ones actually, right? And so why aren't these people helping me more? Why aren't they doing, you know, sometimes I hear that, you know, even sitting on boards from executive directors. And I think the quicker you really sort of realize that that's it. It's actually a very lonely kind of role in many ways. You know, if the board is making a bad decision, it's because you didn't do your job in preparing them and getting the right people to sit in those chairs and supporting them to make the decisions and talking to them to get them to where they need to. So same thing as you would with your team. You know, I think we're easier to understand that role than sometimes we are in upper management and how to sort of work with government. So I guess I would sort of say, whether you're social enterprise, whether you're traditional nonprofit, you're big, you're small, at the end of it, it's leadership. And it's understanding that little funnel role that you play up and down.
I have another question for Franca, if that's okay.
Go.
Franca, you shared with us that you're moving on to a new organization. So the things that you've learned as you've written the book and in your experiences, did that change anything in how you approach the new position? And what was that? What are the takeaways that you had?
Well, that's one of the nicest things about writing the book. You actually realize you've learned a few things. Else you just sort of, kind of glad for like, oh wow, look, there's actually something to write about. So I think it makes you self-aware of actually your journey in a way that I wouldn't have been necessarily, just sort of keep going through the next thing, right? So for sure, I think lots of those lessons have been, there's a sort of a confidence that only comes from being able to have lived through it, a patience probably that I didn't have 13 years ago when I was, because again, as a first-time CEO, sometimes you sort of feel like you have something to prove to. That the people that gave you this trust in picking you in the first place didn't make a horrendous mistake. And so, right, like there is that kind of stuff. And then sort of living through certain things and seeing that you can get through a couple of tough spots, but just, putting one foot in front of the other and keep going. So, and then that's sort of the confidence that comes right from that, and therefore a little bit more patience that I might have had.
Did you ask?
Well, can I just add something?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the because we've kept talking, finished the book, and so while Frank was thinking about this new role, we talked. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is that when you're going for that first role, and you get that call that say, the search committee has selected you, and we'd like to talk to you, and I'd like to have you come on board. There are too many kind of odd constrictions in there, or you don't have the authority that you need to have to actually be able to do the job. Then it can just, it's a recipe for failure for you and for the organization. And so you need to, and Frank and I talk about this in the book, as you need to almost as much interview the organization as the organization is interviewing you.
Sounds like a title for a new book.
Yeah, to make sure that fit is right. And I think what Franca has done in this new role is had a negotiation with them that was very much that.
Very
So
different.
It was
than my
more
first
of
one.
a negotiation of equals,
Yeah.
whereas before that might not have been the inclination.
Yeah, for sure. There's significantly different. Yeah.
Wonderful. Back to you, Katie.
Yeah. On the flip side of that, as somebody who is kind of creating my own boundaries as a founding director, what are important boundaries that I need to have rather than making sure that there aren't boundaries?
Yeah. Well, I think, and I don't know enough about your organization, but I imagine you have a board and you have some kind of group of colleagues that are going down this road with you. And I would talk about those boundaries and set those boundaries in the context of conversation with them, because everybody needs to buy into what those boundaries are, and needs to buy into the job you want to do and the description of the way you're going to do that job. And so I don't think there's any tight set of prescriptions about it, but I think you need to have broad buy-in so that I always use the phrase, we build things like job descriptions and contracts and all the rest of it for rainy days. Because when it's a sunny day and everything's going fine, you don't need all that stuff. And so very often people think up, the job descriptions, the limits, all the rest of it for a sunny day. But when it's a rainy day, those things may not work. So you've got to make sure that you think through the scenarios, think through what might happen, and make sure that everybody understands the limits of your ability to operationalize the mission of the organization. But it's got to be a group context.
And I would add, part of the thing is also that things that might have been the responsibility of your direct supervisor before are now your own responsibility in terms of your own learning. And so there's certain questions that you just cannot ask either the staff or your board. So you kind of have to have these circles, right? That whether it's we talk about this like a kitchen cabinet or whatever, you have to find your groups of people where you could take, so that you can have clear boundaries between the staff and the board. But you need an ability to be able to put your doubts out there without someone telling you what you should do, right? So I mean, Alan obviously was that for me, and other people, right? And so there's different ways of nurturing that, like networks of mentors that are specifically to help you fill the gaps. Like if you're not very good at finance, for example, right? You might want to find somebody, outside of your organization that's going to help you kind of fill that gap. You might actually figure out that I need to learn, this is my learning and for personal development, and actually identify it and then go figure out how you're going to help you fill those gaps. Because the people around you, their purpose is to take care of the organization, not you. Yes, obviously as the leader of the organization, they want to take care of, but their number one job is to be loyal to the mission. And if you're no longer the person who's right to lead it, then it's their responsibility to change it, right? So this is why you want them to have the eye on that, so you have to figure out the other people that are going to take care of you and helping you be that person.
So finding networks and mentorship as self-care. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, good way.
Exactly.
Lovely. I'm going to open it up to the whole audience for conversation. I have a way of doing that in a moment, but I have a question. It's not mine, really. Chris and Marcus, maybe you guys could just wave to the group. They're the ones who kind of helped organize all this. Marcus is in the back there.
Marcus is doing his own thing.
He's reading out to you all. They prepared a script, and when Alan heard that, he laughed. For me, because I never followed them. But there's a good question in here that I want to ask. And so it says, in the book, you talk about how it is the focus on the nitty-gritty, the day-to-day work that separates mediocre organizations from well-managed ones. What do you mean by that? Does the CEO have to be a micromanager? Why don't you start with that one, Franca?
Oh, me. Did you give me the look? Don't start here.
That's your point.
Yeah, I think there's a few things actually. I think this is actually a perfect thing for me to think about right now because we're going sort of through a transition and I really sort of think about these things. But I hear statements like this all the time when people are hiring for roles like this. Like, we need this person to put their own stamp on it. We need this person to make the organization, to bring their own identity to it, to just give them their personality. I don't really know what that means at the end of it, because it's the mission that drives the organization, right? It is that you're there to do. So the person is not supposed to put their own stamp on it, they're supposed to serve the mission. And the mission is the day-to-day of it, the calls you have to make, the people you have to bring to the cause, the information you still need to find to convince more people, to get to the cause, right? That's what separates it. It's not like ideas and let's create, we can all have big ideas, but it's actually getting them on the ground and getting people to commit to them and bringing in the money to make the cause work, having the discipline of measuring the work along the way, getting your team excited to come in every day to do the work, even when they're not being as well paid maybe as some of the colleagues in other sectors. I think that's what separates it, right? It's sort of the nitty-gritty of it. Even though sometimes I think as not-for-profit leaders, we're told that sort of the sexier we can make and the causes and that kind of stuff is where we need to go. It's the day-to-day of it, I think, that matters.
There is a piece of it that I think is important. We talk about this in the book, and any CEO is going to have areas that they are stronger in than others, and they're going to have areas that they're more interested in than others. And one of the things that people generally who lead NGOs in the community sector are not interested in is finance. And you're an exception, actually, because you're not only know it well, you're good at it, but mostly they aren't. And The most common mistake I've seen in running an organization is for the CEO to find somebody that they can offload the whole finance portfolio to. You know, all the bookkeeping and accounting and getting an audit done and like anything to do with the finance piece. And they don't even have, a kind of basic operating notion of how to structure the finances. And if something goes wrong, they wouldn't know it. And I've seen that damage a number of organizations, some quite seriously. And so I always say to people who are taking on leadership roles in organizations that you have to figure out, we talk in the book about key drivers, you have to figure out what the key drivers of your organization are. And you have to have a good working knowledge of how that operates, how each one of those drivers operates. Because on a rainy day, you're going to be the person who's got to catch a mistake, catch something that's gone wrong, and you've got to initiate the way to correct it. Maybe by bringing in a better finance person or getting your finance person to have some help and some training or whatever it is. But if you're just unaware, if you choose not to focus on that, that's what I think of as nitty-gritty kind of stuff. It may be marketing, it may be HR, it may be technology, it may be fundraising, it may be a whole bunch of whatever it is, but you've got to have a basic working knowledge of the key drivers that run your organization so that if something goes wrong, you'll be aware, you'll catch it before it becomes a big problem. But not micromanage everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So you got, in a sense, you got to really know the business,
Yeah.
or at least enough to know what you don't know, so that you're looking for it, right? Yeah. Franca?
Yeah, and I'm just adding the other one I would say is fundraising.
Yeah.
Because I hear all the time with people that are particularly in the executive director roles that are like, I hate fundraising. If only I didn't actually do that fundraising. Instead of like,
My board will do it for me.
yeah, or I'm going to hire someone and then I don't have to do it because, obviously they want the work, right, the mission. And I think like if you really want the role, it's like the P&L has two sides, the expenses and the revenue. Like as the CEO, you've got to participate in both. And if you just want to participate in the expenses, then be the director of programs and be on the ground with people. But if you want to be the CEO, then you've got to take care of that revenue and really take responsibility for it.
We're going to open it up to everyone here, but I want to just bring it back, because what I found refreshing in your book is that it lacked the kind of idealism that makes me hate Facebook. And it's the kind of idealism that says every time you go to Facebook, you feel like an incompetent manager, because they've got these things about, here are the 7 things that you got to be, right? And you're kind of like going at it like, okay, and I walk on water and I turn water into wine, right? Like it's like, what? And if you aren't those things, you're a failure, And then what it's doing is it's shaping, particularly for millennials who are obsessed with Facebook and all the social media kind of things and the quick hits, right, about what makes a great CEO. And it's kind of like you can never live up to most of that stuff, right? So talk to me about that. Like how do we engage even with the people that we lead around, like we've got a job to do, right? And it's not all glorious, and I'm not going to be, this demigod that runs this place. Talk to me about the mess of that, the kind of the mess or the pain of leadership in that sense.
Well, there's a good way to kind of dispel the glorious myths about walking on water, and that is to get people to participate with you in the leadership of the organization. And to understand that it is a series of tasks that need to be achieved, and that we're all trying to do them together, and we all have a role to play. The CEO doesn't do everything in the organization. They do certain things. The director of programs does certain things. The director of administration does certain things, and everybody has to do their thing. I've played a lot of sports in my life. And when you're trying to, particularly in stressful situations, at the end of the game, it's really important that you execute well. you're always taught by good coaches to focus on the things you can control, the things that you can do. They have some understanding that that glorious moment may come someday as a cumulative effect of a lot of hard work, but it's not something that flashes in overnight. And so I think that's one of the ways to do it.
Nice, Franca.
You know, and maybe this is our sector more so than others, but there does seem to be sort of an equation, almost like a sort of hero worshipping of like leaders in the sector, right? Sort of, you know, there's this ideal kind of like of what you're supposed to be and do. I'm really suspicious of it. I think ego-driven anything really. I'm really suspicious of it because I just sort of feel like how would it feel to work in that organization? You know, when it's like, you know, nothing really works unless everybody does it. Like a ton of people do it together, and it's the idea. Again, it's not you. It's, you know, you really have to make sure that it doesn't become about you. You know, and sometimes it does like feel like, you know, you see that kind of stuff. So I think it's your responsibility to really separate yourself. So you're right. The book is about that. There's an accessibility to it, and sort of it's not myth making. It's not hero making. You know, it really is just sort of the basic. I want the book to be accessible. I want the book to be easy. You know, because you know, like it's not supposed to be this sort of you know, hard to reach. You know, it's not practical. It's practical, like,
nice.
You know, and yeah. Anyway.
Sandra, maybe you're going to go back to the audience. That means you can still ask questions, but it's kind of symbolic. I'm going to leave here too, and you're just going to leave these two up here. I'm going to facilitate you with the microphone, but also I know that you have an e-copy. Here's your copy of the actual book, and you get first row for signing. Okay, let's open it up to the audience. There's lots more questions, but you bring yours out. You got one that you want to ask Alan and Franca.
First brave souls with their hand up.
Liz. First question that you have here for them.
So I sat in the front row. So you said something earlier, Franca, that I was intrigued about, and I'm just trying to remember how you phrased it. But I do think it's interesting to me to think about, you know, stepping into leadership and then thinking about yourself as that pivot point between this funnel above you and this funnel below you. And so the question I would have is, what was one thing that you think you did brilliantly in that kind of pivot point, and what was one thing that you might have struggled with?
I definitely struggled at the beginning in the loneliness of it, and thinking, you know, I had this example that I shared last time about, you know, I thought the board was like, I needed to impress them in some ways, right? I needed to, you know, sort of like I had really felt like I was the CEO, so I still almost needed them, kind of like the interview that never ends, you know? And so, and usually, you know, I was a director of program of a pretty big organization before I came here. And you know, I would come up with ideas, and then I'd present them, and then, you know, and people would be like, oh, it's so great, so brilliant. And so I felt I would do the same thing with the board. So, you know, like I went off and did that, like in fact designed like a new program, and I introduced it at the board. You can imagine if you've ever done this before, like the reaction wasn't exactly what I thought it was gonna be, you know? They were gonna love me and an applause and the whole thing. And instead they were like, what is this, right? And they'd never heard about it before. I didn't talk to any of them individually, so I didn't do the work. You know, I actually thought a good surprise would be like a great surprise, as opposed to there's no such thing as surprising your board. It never works, right? So in that way, that's the part, you know, what I really hadn't really understood it, that I needed to break them up, not as a group, but as individuals, and actually treat each one of them individual and spend lots of time, you know, doing that with them, like having conversations, getting to know them, understanding what drove them to the work, what it is that I could really use their talents for, you know, and really make them enjoy it, and then really test ideas out with them and sort of see, and so I knew where it would be, right? So that's one of those things. Something that I did well in that first.
Well, yeah, or even throughout the 13 years.
Well, things have improved.
Yeah.
Luckily, I don't do that anymore. I think and I guess it's the reverse of that is one thing, and actually it was like after a conversation I had with Alan, actually, I kind of realized this, which is sometimes we wait to talk to board members until we have something to tell them, as opposed to for no reason whatsoever, right? So, which is like, kind of having remember like a telephone rotation, right? And it could be your board, it could be some of your key stakeholders, donors, just getting out, right? And you just sort of call them up and you're like, hey, you find some excuse, like I read this article, I thought you might be interested, I just want to make sure you saw it, right? And then be quiet and see what comes at you, It's kind of like checking the pulse, right? And then, some of them are like, oh yeah, it's fine, boom, they're fine, right? And others are going to use it as an opportunity to actually kind of tell you something that you need to find out. So that's the kind of thing that I've gotten a lot better at, is to sort of seek feedback without necessarily having an agenda going into the meeting.
Nice. Maybe you could also introduce yourself as you're asking the question.
Hi, I'm Kathy Must. I want to switch it around a little bit. And we're asking for what advice you would give to a board who is going to be onboarding a new executive director. It could be a seasoned, it could be a new one. I mean, you made some comments that I think I could switch around, but what would be the three things that you advise the board? And I particularly think about the comment that the board and the organization, the board is around the CEO to support the organization, not the CEO, and yet that's what you really want to do. So what would be your advice to the board to successfully support the success of the new ED?
Well, I think most boards aren't actually normally in a good condition to onboard a new CEO. And I think a lot of the work I've done over the years, but particularly in recent years with boards, is help them understand who they are, who the board is in relationship to the organization. So what is the spectrum of skills you need on the board to contribute to the mission of the organization? How well structured is succession in the board? Not just in the board itself in terms of term limits, but in committee chairs, the chair position, etc. And then how well does the board understand the role of governance? And we talk about this to some extent in the book about the transparency and accountability, about approving strategy, mission, but then strategy. And requiring operational plans, and there's a set of things and the CEO is one of them. It's very difficult for a board to bring on a CEO and fully apprise them of what the expectations are and what the environment is going to be, particularly the governance environment, which will be the CEO's primary interface with the board, if the board doesn't know it itself. So, it's know thyself. That would be my advice.
I jump in and said the board chair is essential in the transition. So sort of like that person really, they're their own funnel, right? And sort of in the link. So one for sure is to actually have a document that would be very clear, like these are all the stakeholders, right? To be able to talk to them and make sure that the previous CEO has prepared this for you to hand to the new CEO. These are the key stakeholders. This is the bridge to the stakeholder. There's always a bridge in an organization, right? It's this individual who's the key, right? So if I know it's this individual, then I know if it's like, Susie is going to be my link to these three major stakeholders, I got to go talk to Susie first before I get here, right? Because this person is going to do the lovely bridge is like, oh, you have to meet Franca. She's just sort of, right? And there you go. So we forget the bridges oftentimes and go straight here. So a board needs to tell you what those are. I think also, I think it'd be really useful to talk, the chair, we have this, we talk about this in the book, which is after when you get the job, it's really important for you to have a very frank conversation with the chair as to why they chose you. So on the other end, I would sort of say, if you're the board chair, sit your CEO and tell them, it's not because they were the best necessarily, but you chose them because of very specific reasons, not necessarily their skill set, but because of the state of the organization, where you think your priorities are. And now sort of like, we chose you because we were in a turnaround situation, and this is specifically the skill set and talent we needed. Or we chose you because we really need to see the growth, and we're really impressed with some of the the work that you've done up to this point around that. So that's what we really care about. So you're kind of giving them a sense of what the state of the board and why, right? So I think that's also, I would say, a second one. And then the chair really probably should spend the first 6 months of the role meeting with your CEO once a month. I mean, I would sort of say, like, I would really feel really committed to that, or if it's not the chair, it might be somebody else, depending on your organization, but just to kind of, not sort of check in, but it's just like kind of giving them that opportunity to kind of like figure stuff out faster.
We got a whole
No mic,
kinds-
please. Don't need the mic.
It'd be lovely if you could use the book.
Okay, fine. Okay, so,
And who are you again?
oh yes, sorry. So I'm Mikhail Kane, and I have a question because I have, and you probably had this experience too, where people will tell you that you know nothing because you're a silly little girl. How as a CEO do you deal with that? Because you're now in a professional situation and you can't say the things you probably want to.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side of that, how do you deal as a CEO with the expectation that you will now mentor females because you're a powerful female figure, and now suddenly part of your day is supposed to go to representing your gender?
Yeah. Well, do you want to answer that one? No, okay, so here's the thing. I was really well prepared in the sense that I always had male bosses, and I was always the youngest person in the room by a few years. So, previously, before I came here, for example, the manager, the directors were actually really young, which, I'm really enjoying that now. But probably when I joined the organization, I was, 33 years old at the time. I probably looked like I was 26 or 7. Not that that matters, but that's just, that's the reality. It's a little harder sometimes. So I had the most fantastic woman on my board who was an executive director of an organization. And she's Vita Costa, I'm naming her because she deserves lots of praise. And she was essential because there were moments, and in the board, and particularly our executive, where a couple of folks would have that kind of attitude and cross the line into management, right? Cross the line into management. And it's easier if it's someone else to do this instead of your ally in the board, and she would get them off my lawn, That's not up to you, that's Franca, And so it was, particularly, obviously, it won't happen as you build relationships with people and they get to know you, obviously. And they, they're well-meaning, they're not, but they do cross, right? And so having somebody, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a woman, but like an executive director who's experienced, who can kind of, boom, get them out, is essential, I think, in that first time as a CEO on a board. Yeah, and then in terms of mentoring, I mentor, I have, an organization, obviously, that is about supporting the next generation of leaders, of all genders. And so I kind of enjoy being able to support them and mentor all of them. So I don't feel necessarily a responsibility to one more than the other. But I do recognize that it's very different, and I think as women, as young women particularly, I always encourage young women to make the leap into the CEO role by sort of saying that, the stats are clear that a young woman will look at a job description, particularly a CEO role, and unless she can click every single thing in terms of experience, she's not going for it. A guy will see those 2 things, I'm good to go, So that's the reality. That's where. I think that's the key. Is actually just the only difference I see is in that moment of like not waiting to be overly prepared to make the leap, but leap and learn what you need to learn.
you're not going to try that one, are you? To answer that
I'll
question.
bow to expertise.
Paul?
My name is Paul Heidebrecht. Thanks to both of you for being here and for your work in the book. If I could go back to where Paul Bourne started in terms of the impetus of the book, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a bit more about the connections or the disjunctions between the creative process of generating this book, which in my mind involves a lot of contemplation and reflection and consideration and time, with the actual reality of what leadership often entails, which in a look through the chapter headings, a lot of doing. And so, I mean, in light of the experience, I mean, where have you found moments of time for contemplation and reflection in the midst of the act of leading? And how has that informed your leadership? Or are these just two disparate kinds of work?
I mean, I don't, it's a good question. I remember quite a few years ago, 30 plus years ago, 30, 40 years ago even, talking to a fellow in the United States who ran the California School of Psychology. And he was talking about the creative process, and he talked about the importance of being active and doing, but making sure that you always took time to kind of be inactive and thinking, and that one fed the other, and it was as virtuous a cycle as you can imagine. And that doesn't answer the question in a busy life where you find that time, but it doesn't have to be 3 months of one, 3 months of the other. It can be after the kids are in bed, you know, or the previous book that Paul mentioned, Urban Nation, that I wrote almost 10 years ago. I wrote 2 chapters of it on a flight from Auckland to London. You know, the first one on the first leg to Hong Kong, and the second one, and it just flowed out because I'd had time to think about what it all was. I'd had a non-writing time to structure what it was, and then it all just kind of, you know, I knew what I was going to write, and I just had to kind of do it, get it written. And I think you can find that time to just think of problems. I always ask the question of people and organizations, who wakes up in the middle of the night thinking about this organization, thinking of how we're going to deal with the issues that we face. And a lot of people think that's a terrible thing. I like it when I wake up and do that, and have that time to actually spend, maybe it's half an hour, 20 minutes, or whatever it is, just there's this kind of moment of clarity, and to me that's contemplative time. That's you know, kind of precious time, and I've come to think very positively about that time. I don't think of it as lost sleep. I think of it as kind of a found opportunity to do something. But I think it is important that you not just constantly be on a doing, but structure things either in short waves or long waves, so that you can find time to actually think about what you're doing, contextualize it, and think about solutions. Don't just get caught in the problems and redefining the problems over and over and over. It's important to define them so you know what you're dealing with, but to be as positive as possible in terms of solution seeking. It's an imperfect answer.
I think it's also a personality aspect. So, I mean, Alan, you can see that he's an introvert, and I'm actually an introvert who lives an extroverted life. So I just kind of put it on as a coat every morning, and then I crash at about 9 p.m., at which point I need an hour of nobody talking to me, you know, so that I can kind of just, you know, take that sort of. So for me, it's silence is my way to contemplate, right? It's to just be able, like, I love that moment. I don't know if ever, when the elevator's doors close and there's nobody in it, it's pure silence. Have you noticed? Like, I just like, oh. And I'm a mom of an 8-year-old, very chatty little boy. So So I'm a big believer of it as well, but I think it depends on who you are and how you kind of can figure out that moment, right? I think extroverts, for example, can do it in conversation, right? Like with people. So just booking time to have conversations with people, you know, on the topic might help you, right? It's just like an hour, I'm just going to talk. Or, you know, for me, I kind of do it through reading or through pure silence, just like where, you know, I don't need people around me. Or even these, you know, there's these professional development programs, right, or whatever. Sometimes it's not really what they teach you. It's just the fact that, you know, in your house, you know, having to clean and on top of everything else you do, right? This is not the day-to-day, just taking you out of the day-to-day and the people that you know, and just, you know, being a week in this program is important. Oftentimes, just, you know, just give yourself the space. So, but I would agree, you just have to have the pauses or vacation. You know, I kind of see sometimes CEOs of charities that kind of grind, you know, like not feeling like they can never sort of slow it down. And I think moments of creativity and clarity can only come when you separate yourself from, oftentimes anyways, from the day-to-day of the grind.
Giving special recognition to this side of the room.
Yeah, Chuck Howell's my name. Just interested in the writing process, how that went, who did most of the writing, did you share it, did you have to do a lot of rewriting? Because I'm working on a book right now, so I'm going through that process.
So, as Franca said, this started out as conversations that we had, and then at one point, I noticed she had a laptop in front of her. And I couldn't see her hand. And she was making notes of it, and so essentially what would happen is that we would really just have a conversation on the we picked the topic. We settled, I think, fairly early on in the structure of the book, that it would be a sequential structure of thinking about you might want to lead, and all the way through until you leave, and knowing when it's time to leave. So it was kind of a chronological structure. So we structured our conversations that way. And once we got to the point that we decided it would be a book, and that point came about when Franca looked up at me one day and said, "We ought to write a book about this." So we did. Yeah. But from that point on, we were a little more careful about phrasing things, actually saying it in a way that could be written down, that made some kind of sense as a readable thing and an accessible thing. And Franca made very good, not, I would say, transcriptions, but good enough notes that she would go back and then reconstruct what she thought the conversation had been. She would send me a draft of that chapter electronically. We'd go back and forth on it a little bit. We were both pretty busy, so it wasn't actually, I got it that morning and I responded that afternoon. It was one morning and one afternoon, but not necessarily connected. And then we do that. Some of the chapters were easier than others.
Yeah.
And then some of the things, like Franca knows a lot more about than I do, like fundraising. You know, she knows as much as I think anybody in the country knows about that. And I knew more about finance than she did. And so I tended to write more what I knew about. But I would say that's maybe 2 or 3 chapters or like that, and the rest are really shared. But we found that with the editing back and forth, you know, we kind of began to converge around a voice on it. And then subsequent to finishing it, we did get hired an editor on contract to come in and help with the consistency of voice. The first time I ever thought about writing a book, I talked to a guy that I played tennis with, actually, who was Murray Ross, who was the first president of York University. And I said something along the lines of, "So Murray, how do you write a book?" And he said, "Make sure you write 1,000 good words a day. Like when you're actually sitting down to write it, write 1,000 good words a day. And don't stop until," and good words are like not just thrown down, but words that you're relatively happy with. They may be completely changed later, but they're good enough for that day. You might write 10,000 that day, but you write at least 1,000. And that way you'll just keep your nose to the grindstone, keep doing it. The other good tip I had on writing was when I was writing Urban Nation was HarperCollins approached me to write the book. And I said to the guy who had approached me, who was one of their senior editors, I said, I don't know how to, I've thought about doing this, but I haven't had any success in actually doing it. He says, well, the key to it is a good outline. We need a good outline. And I said, well, how do you do that? And he said, well, that's what I'm for. I help you. But a good outline, something to write into. So we had a good structure to write into, the chronological structure, but there are various tips that kind of help you do it.
Just keeping the mic on that side.
Anybody?
Pass it up. Nice.
I'm Teresa Cose, and thank you so much for your talk today. It really resonates with me as a pretty newly minted CEO. Yeah, board surprises. I'm worried about that. So what I see is a real gap in the opportunity for people like me, who are brand new CEOs, to get together with other people, particularly in the nonprofit. There's a bit of an industry for that kind of coming together in the for-profit sector, but not in the not-for-profit. And I wondered if you're aware of any opportunities for people to share information. Oh,
It's exactly what Capacity Canada does.
oh, no, please do.
No,
Go for it.
I can go for it. That was one of the reasons actually that Capacity Canada came into being, specifically in Waterloo region, that there wasn't enough support for not-for-profits and not-for-profit leadership at both the operational level and at the governance level. So that is a lot of what we do. So talk to me afterwards.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we do have some network groups.
Yeah.
Nice.
And just to add to that, I mean, I have my own, so like of CEOs, right? It's sort of a group of people. You have to be careful because even with this group, when you meet, I would sort of say that there's a shared sort of understanding of what we do, but we also share a lot of people. So donors and individuals. So there's only, generally, I would sort of say be careful because there's only so much that's really appropriate for you to share within each other to the group, right? So, this is why I kind of think that it really is important to have different kind of groupings around you to do that, right? There's the people that you just trust to be able to talk through a very difficult issue. Those are people you really know and you really do trust, right? And then who have this expertise, right? But the CEO, what's the best thing about the CEO network, and that's probably exactly what you're doing, which is that, it's a set of basic things like, does anybody know a good outsource for my IT, right? Boom, 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 rather than me spending 10 hours on sort of sourcing that out, right? Or I'm looking to hire, an accounting firm, like, what do you guys think are my 5 key things I need to look at, right? So in that way, it's sort of as a shortcut to your learning, but it is not, I'd say, CEO group is definitely not where I would open up.
Alan, Franca, final word. Let's wrap her up. And I'll say a couple of closing words. Just last things that you haven't, something that you came here to say but you haven't said yet.
Well, I'll let Frank have the last word in that regard. This was, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us here today, and thank you all for being here. It's really a privilege, and we appreciate your being here. This was kind of a fun book to write in a way. It was prolonged fun.
Prolonged.
and it was, there was a fair amount of work on it to get it done. But I think part of what was so good for me about it was, kind of learning as we went along, learning together, I do end up talking to a lot of people in what might be called a mentorship role, but I never kind of thought that I was somebody with like a mentor thing behind my desk. But I've always taken the position, and we take the position in both our corporate and our community activities that being accessible and being, engaging in conversations with people is just part of the way we want to do what we do, and it's kind of our sense of being democratic, being part of the democratic milieu, that's what you do. With Franca, I never thought of it as kind of a you know, a mentoring thing, more as just an interesting person that was fun to share learning with, and so I hope that comes across in the book, that it's not sort of a wisdom from on high, but kind of shared learning and shared exploration, and that was fun, and so I hope you enjoyed reading that.
And I guess sort of following that, in enjoying and the joy, I guess sometimes just because it sometimes can be such a difficult road, and so again, I'll repeat it, lonely road, that, you know, the hope with the book is actually about being super accessible and actually sort of show, like, not to make it a hero thing or sort of to take it right down to the ground, and so that people really can see themselves in it and access it as they want. And actually sometimes just reinforce what they already know, because it's not like there's like, you know, radically new ideas in the book. That wasn't the purpose of the book. It was actually very much the opposite, to kind of, you know, talk about the day-to-day of it, and really you can do it, you know, if you're really committed to it. But ideally to kind of, you know, you're it, own it, you know, own it, walk with it, and therefore figure out how to enjoy it, because it will define you so much, you know, it's such a big part of your life. And so that not to kind of find blame in it, and there's always something to complain about, honestly. You know, I can sort of find something to complain about all the time, right? Sort of, but instead of like, stop doing that, and you just kind of, you know, like, just own it, and then figure it out. You know, no one's to blame when stuff goes wrong, nobody's, you know, you're just like, it's such a huge privilege to be able to, you know, to be in this role, and to have the ability to get a whole bunch of people to work together towards a common cause. You know, that's all your role is, right? Is just get people working together, right? So I guess that's the thing, is that I hope it feels that, you know, there's sort of a joy and a simplicity in it, that you feel, you know, that anybody really can step into it and learn how to do it.
Wonderful. Let's thank Franca and Alex.